Okay, so what we'll do now is we'll actually go around the room. We'll start the session. We'll go around the room and do a bit of an introduction with everyone. I'll kick things off. So hello, I am Buddha, developer advocate at Tyke, and I'm going to be your host. You'll see a lot of me throughout this whole day. So I'm hoping I'm not going to bore you too much with this, but I'm going to try and get out of the way as much as possible and bring out questions and information to the best of my abilities. There is a Q&A section at the bottom, so feel free to ask your questions throughout this discussion. As a moderator, I'll pick those questions up as it flows into the discussion. We'll float those over to our amazing panelists. So keep those questions coming. If you're having trouble with chat for the time being, which I think a couple of people might be having, just use the Q&A section for the time being. We'll figure something out in the next break. So with that, over to Sonia for a quick introduction, and then we'll head over to our panelists.
Hi, I'm Sonia. I'm a group product manager at Tech, and 20 years experience in tech. I used to be a product manager in the observability space and now in the API space. So I'm really looking forward to this whole journey, and especially this exceptional panel with all of you guys.
Fantastic. Over to Abby.
All right. Hi, y'all. I'm Abby Bangser, based in the UK. I work for a company called Syntasso, which is focused on the platform engineers' experience building platforms. More specifically, we're building the platform framework Cradix, which helps people build composable and supportable internal developer platforms.
Over to you, Andy.
I am joining. Thanks, first of all, for having me. Welcome, everyone. And I'm joining from Linz, Austria, not too far away from Sonia, because Sonia and I used to work together. Good memories from back then. I work for a company called Dynatrace, and my role is really to help show people what we can do with observability, and not just to get a metric that says green, yellow, or red in case a system is up and running, but observability data from development all the way into production, how we can integrate it better to allow developers to do their job. And I think, Sonia, in the intro you mentioned earlier, you highlighted a couple of worst practices or problematic practices out there. I think we will hit on some of those today. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Over to you, Navish.
Hello, everyone. I'm Navish Bahl, Principal Solutions Engineer here in Grafana Labs, where we are building the open and composable observability platform based upon standardized ways to collect telemetry. I'm based out of Toronto, Canada, been in the observability space for almost a decade now, and happy to be here. So thanks for having us, Buddha and Sonia.
No worries at all. Glad to have you with us. Over to you, Ruchir.
Hey guys, thanks Buddha and Sonia for having me. My name is Ruchir. I used to be the lead engineer on the observability platform team at Netflix until May of last year, after which I decided to take the plunge and co-found Cardinal. We're still in stealth, but I think what I can share at the moment is we're focused on the return on investment for observability.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you for the introduction over there. I think the best way to kick this off, is to just have opening statements. Let's have opening statements about what does observability mean to you. Now, that might be a bit broad, so let's narrow it down a little bit to say, what is one key area of focus for you as an individual, you as a business, in terms of observability? Because we know observability can go in a few different directions. It can take the shape of a few different things. So tell us what observability means to you, and which specific aspect of observability are you most keen on pursuing as an individual, as a business? So I'm going to start this off with Andy. So maybe Andy, just kick us off.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've been fortunate enough to work in that industry since 2001, which is when I started to work for a company that was actually doing performance testing. And with performance testing, we ran a lot of tests. Actually, I started, and this was the best thing of all, I started as a tester on that testing product. So I had to figure out, if the testing product doesn't work, why doesn't it work? And obviously, I was relying on some type of observability data. Back then, we had some metrics and some logs, and this helped me out. But it really helped me to understand what data do you actually need in case things go wrong. Later on, I then helped our customers to use our testing product to test and load test their applications, and then help them based on the data we created, based on the observability we provided while the system was under test, why things don't go well. And now at Dynatrace, we do this at large scale for the largest organizations in the world, from dev to production. What motivates me and what gets me excited about observability, but also makes me frustrated at the same time, and I have to put this out here, because for the last 20 years, I've seen similar patterns why applications, systems, especially distributed systems, start to fail under load, start to slow down, start to make end users unhappy. And I think this is why it's great that we have a conference like this, where we can raise the awareness about the importance of observability and using it early on to avoid certain patterns that definitely lead to bad experiences for the end user. And I think, Sonia, you mentioned it in the beginning. You said we need to think about the end user. It's not just two microservices talking to each other. It's also there's somebody at the front end that wants to do something with your backend. And we need to figure out what type of data do we need to capture, to observe, so we can make sure this doesn't happen again.
Great. I think I'm going to dig a little bit deeper later on into some of those patterns that you just mentioned, some of the things that you want to really take care of. But I wanted to bring in Navish into this conversation about what does observability look like for you, and then what specifically are you and your team interested in or focusing on right now from observability?
Yeah. Interestingly, my career also began somewhere in the testing space. I was a network engineer, so to speak. So I started lower in the OSI stack, so layer 3, layer 4. If you guys are networking geeks, you will know what I'm talking about. But then as I progressed in my career, I moved my way up to the stack, and that's where I think most of the things are really pertinent and tangible to end users, as well as for the user experience itself. My main emphasis for having good observability sometimes is like a black box for people. Like they have a system which is up and running until something goes awry and they don't know what's going on. So you start gaining insights from where it would matter the most. And where it matters the most is generally higher up the stack, because that's where the users start feeling the pain. That's where we have been focusing our efforts on, but it's a slow journey. If you want to move up the stack, you have to take small steps to get there. You can't really start just instrumenting your applications from the get-go and start gaining insights, because not everybody has the might and the due diligence and the teams to actually do that effectively. And also there's this standardized way, which is happening a lot in the industry, which we're seeing. Developers want to develop application with existing telemetry, which they can expose right off the bat, rather than just trying something new, which is a standard within their organization. That's what also we are seeing within the industry these days. So all this to say, emphasize on what's going to matter the most to the business and what's going to matter most to the end user experience. And that generally starts with the application layer, but you have to build your way up to that stack, and you can't really jump to that stack.
Great. I definitely have some follow-up questions, especially around sort of planning and designing, and when should you start thinking about some of these things? Because ultimately data collection is I would almost call it time sensitive to a point, because the earlier you start, the better it is to a certain degree, because you'll get those insights a lot faster, a lot quicker, and then when you're building layers on top of layers, then you are in a better position to be able to map all that out. So we'll come to that in a little bit later. We're still on the opening statements right now. So heading over to you, Ruchir. What does observability look like for you? What did it look like to you in Netflix? Has that changed for you now at Cardinal? And then which aspects are you focusing on now and versus where you were focusing on previously?
Yeah, I think at Netflix, like we started the observability platform, it was with the focus of actually building an in-house observability stack, from scratch. And initially it started as a data platform, like let's allow people to actually take their own opinions on how they want to observe their specific systems, and we will be effectively a glorified data platform. And then over like the 7 years that I was there, the focus started shifting to like, hey, isn't observability sort of an abused term at this point? Because if you are a glorified data platform, people will try and get all sorts of and all shapes of data in there. And as the builder of that data platform, at first you're annoyed, but then you effectively sort of start leveling with your user, and you start understanding that the real need is to ask questions about the health of the systems, and more than the systems, the business use case that they support. And I think the focus at Cardinal is still sort of how to do that more effectively, but also sort of focus on the ROI, like I was mentioning before, which is one new request comes in, a bit which may not bring additional revenue, but it definitely translates into n more logs, n more events, n more metrics, so on and so forth. So how do you effectively bring some sort of a governance layer on top of this data and give the user a sense of what data is getting generated and how is that getting used?
Great, absolutely. That makes sense. We'll pursue that a little bit deeper, I think, in the next question. But I wanted to bring Abby into this conversation. And again, Abby, I think I'm going to use your discussion almost as a segue into the next part as well. And I think there's a question from Sachin in the comments section, who's also asking about something similar. So let's take it this way. So let's start with what observability means for you, but we also know that you work very much in the platform engineering, platform team space. So tell us a little bit in the context of platform teams, which would include things like people like SREs and DevOps and platform engineers. What does observability look like for you? And what is sort of the big ticket value that comes with including or implementing observability as part of your platform stack?
Yeah, so many questions. So first of all, I thought we might have a full house of people who started in testing as a part of their career. But I myself did, and I have had titles within testing, DevOps, SRE, platform engineer, and now just software engineer, and I think that what's interesting is it's always about trying to get the information, as Andreas said right from the start, get the information you need to be able to do your job, to be able to know if you're achieving what you need to, and to bring in what Ruchir is saying, like it's about the business outcomes as well. And I think that the important thing about observability for me, and where I really got on this journey many years ago, was the idea that you could focus on shaping data so that you didn't have to upfront know every question you want to ask. So of course there's something there around how you shape your data to enable that. So there is upfront design, there is things you will learn and you will iterate and you will improve about the shape of your data. But when you're thinking about shaping that data in a way to encourage a diversity of questions and a diversity of questions you don't yet even know you want to ask, then that changes how you think about data. And I think that's where I really started to see power behind this, behind the movement. To answer your question, Buddha, around where does this come in with platform engineering? I think that and to answer the SRE question, whether or not SRE is platform engineering, I mean that's a whole webinar and a whole day in itself. But I think that it comes into the team interactions, right? The models within team topologies and how they encourage you to think about platform teams, enabling teams, complicated subsystems teams, and how each of those teams tends to interact with their consuming teams or the other teams around them. And I think that there is nothing that says an SRE team has to be an enabling team. That's one model I've worked under before. It can also be a team that runs like a platform team and offers services and managed services for other teams. So just to say, I don't think titles are always the clearest thing. But from my perspective, thinking about platform engineering, thinking about internal support systems, I'm mostly focused about who needs what information and how do you get that to them in the right forms, and making sure that each team has the ability to build and run their software as they need to, and has the information to do so safely and successfully. So I think that's the big thing with platforms in this space.
Understood. Absolutely makes a whole lot of sense in terms of sort of, I think you touched upon the design and sort of what you can do up front. I'm curious again, when you're thinking about it, there's obviously this value discussion that comes up over and over again. What is the true value of observability? We know, I think you touched upon the platform engineering side of things. Andy, I want to bring you in to sort of talk a little bit about, so you work with sort of large scale businesses and enterprises. What kind of sort of the business side of, from a business side of things, what do you see the value that people perceive? Is it more about getting to SLAs faster, troubleshooting things a little bit easier? Does that help in go-to-market in some way? But what is that value proposition around observability that perhaps hits the spot with businesses when they are looking to either make a decision for adopting or implementing it as a solution?
A couple of answers here. I think where it obviously should help is giving the answer, are we actually meeting our goals that we have as a business? Yeah, you're launching Navish, I think Ruchir, I think you said you're in stealth mode, right? You have a new business idea. You want to bring a new product to the market. You want to understand, do we meet our goals? Do we have that many users in the first year and the second year? Which features are used? So things like that is perfect for observability, right? Do we reach our goals? But then the question is, do we actually know and can we articulate our goals? And then we need to figure out how can we use observability to measure it. So I think for me, most often, I know you use the word SLO and I love SLOs, but sometimes SLOs are just used the wrong way because people say, everybody's talking about SLOs. We need to define SLOs. But then I typically ask the question, so what are actually your objectives? Do you know what your objectives are? And then some people say, well, we don't really know because we don't know what our top goals are and then how we can trickle this down. So in the end, what I want to say, I think observability is perfect if you have goals that can be measured, but first you need to articulate those goals and then you can figure out with observability how to measure those goals. And then they can be ranging from the very front end, how many people are going to sign up for your new product, or how many people are using that API in the backend, or what is our availability? Because if that is a goal that you have to your end consumers, then obviously this is something you want to measure, and this is where observability comes in again.
Got it. I think the thing that I'm listening over and over again, and it keeps coming up, is don't get on the hype cycle. I mean, if just because someone is talking about SLOs, maybe that makes sense for you, maybe it doesn't. I think go back to what is your current need? Go back to what exactly does your business need? What exactly does your team need? What does your platform need at this point of time to succeed? And then define that and articulate that in whichever way possible. And that is sort of the starting point of designing your observability strategy, solution, whatever you want to call it. So I think that's a really, really good point to get started on. I think we've got a couple of questions that are coming in. So maybe we'll start taking some of those questions. There's a question directed at you, Ruchir, which is, can you please give us a couple of example scenarios where one can implement data governance in the context of observability? It's very interesting because governance, I think like somebody mentioned in the comments, it tends to get a bad rep from time to time because it feels like it's a restriction. It's something that you have to follow, otherwise you can't progress. It's sort of that's something that hinders innovation in some cases, or some people's mind, which truly I'm a big believer that is not the case. If you want to innovate, innovations are built on strong foundations. And in order for you to have strong foundations, you need to have things that are repeatable, that are predictable. And that's where governance practices come in. There's a way to standardize things. Your base layers need to be standardized so that you can innovate on top of it, because that's how you build a tall skyscraper as opposed to having a short house. But with that, that's my take on governance. But over to you, Ruchir, on the question of some example scenarios where one can implement data governance in the context of observability.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great call out. I think governance as a term sounds restrictive, but that's not how I meant it. Governance is more about how to not let your observability data platform become a kitchen sink. How do you actually sort of have an ongoing strong opinion on this is the data, this is the usage for that data, what organizations within my company are actually using it, what services are using it more than some other services, and then more importantly, are the business outcomes that data is eventually supposed to enable, are those outcomes actually being delivered? And very simply, there would be like an example that I can think of is people talk about mean time to detect, mean time to remediate a specific problem, and which, for what it's worth, we've tried long and hard at Netflix to objectively measure, but we've I would say categorically failed across the years. And it often just came down to, is the mean time to understand for the average engineer, and when I say average, I mean in the terms of tenure. You're not someone who is sort of out there with all the tribal knowledge that you need in order to troubleshoot and debug. You're someone who is still new and green in certain areas and has like an overall exposure to what the company does and what your team does. And you should still have a mean time to understand, which is near the median in your organization, and understand the system, understand what it does, and understand why it's not doing what it's supposed to do right at this point in time. And so if you look at that metric and you measure it, now, if that metric is sort of like coming in with 2 standard deviations for certain organizations, that's a problem. And if, let's say, that specific organization is also the biggest spender in terms of what they are spending on observability, that's even a bigger problem.
Understood. Absolutely agree with that 100%. Which actually leads me quite nicely to the next part of this. So you mentioned about how people are approaching it, how developers need to think about this. You've got engineers thinking about this, businesses thinking about it. Let's go back to the beginning almost and say we are going to be starting our observability journey today. What would that initial step look like? Navish, I'm gonna pose this question to you. What observability area? I think this is a question from James, and I think sort of fades into a question that David is asking as well, which is, what observability areas do you find give you the most bang for the buck? Again, there may not be one answer to this, but out of curiosity, if you were starting off your observability journey today, what would be that one thing that you absolutely need to have in place when you're thinking about getting started? What areas should you be focusing on first when you're getting started with observability? Navish.
Okay. The answer to that is not easy, but because it honestly depends upon what kind of issues or pain or objectives, as Andy was trying to talk about, what are you trying to solve with observability, right? I don't think there is like a magic elixir which is going to tell you, hey, start here. And if you start here, I would say 90% of your issues are going to be resolved. I don't think there is that. But then you have these foundational pieces which you can choose amongst, right? You have the observability pillars of metrics, logs, traces. There is profiling, which is making a lot of noise as the 4th pillar of observability. Depending upon the business objective, depending upon where you are facing the most amount of grave pain in whatever problem you're trying to solve, and which areas would that encompass? Would that encompass like the infrastructure related issues? Are you facing more of those? And that's where I would say, if you're facing more of those, metrics would be a good place to start, because now at least you would get to know what is happening within your environment, right? And it's not as heavy or not as tricky or complex to get started with. But if that's not the case and you are facing issues, a lot of users are complaining that there is a lot of slowness in these apps which you are actually hosting, as opposed to like the Googles and the Ubers of the world, which are millisecond latencies, then I'd say you have to start somewhere in the application domain, even though it may not be as easy to start off with, but it's not super difficult either. So answer is, it really depends. You have to be really prescriptive in the problem which you are trying to solve and use observability to solve that problem, instead of just going with de factos, because I don't think there are any de factos.
Yeah, absolutely. Know what you want and then pursue as you go along. But also equally, I would imagine wherever you start, I think that could be a starting point, but things evolve, right? I think there is from a strategy perspective, from a evolution of needs perspective, things will change. Your platform stack is potentially going to change. It's going to evolve. Maybe it's going to reduce, maybe it's going to expand. And you need to have that agile mindset almost in terms of how you're approaching that strategy from an observability standpoint. I'm curious to bring Abby into this discussion as well. Any particular insights around, how do you get started? And perhaps one important thing that you find people sort of forgetting about when implementing API observability. There's a question from David.
Yeah, sure. So I think for getting started, I mean, Navish already had a great answer there. I would add to that the the focus on the socio-technical challenges that what you're trying to solve here. Because to Ruchir's point, like failed to like answer all questions with data empirically and without any qualifications there. So when you're doing that, one of the problems I see a lot is people try and ask the questions they know they can answer instead of asking the questions that are going to actually bring value to the company or to their team or to their users. And so I think building a culture of asking questions and acknowledging when you have to put in place proxy measures because it's just not viable right now to have a better measurement in place, but acknowledging that and encouraging people not to sort of dumb down their questions, but instead to ask those hard-hitting questions, proxy where you have to, build improvements as you can along. And that's that socio side of the technical challenges of collecting telemetry. So I would definitely want to get started there. The other place I'd want to make sure I get involved as I get started, and this one was learned the hard way, and maybe also answers that question of what else do people forget about and whatnot, is having ownership over your own data pipelines and your own data. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to ship data off to third-party providers, and I'm a huge advocate of buy what you can. Go buy somebody to manage all this data for you. The number of engineering hours I've put into keeping Thanos and Prometheus up and healthy when someone puts a high cardinality metric in is well worth buying a solution, I think, at this stage. But buying a solution for visualizing your data is different than having outsourcing the ability to collect, filter, and manage that data into more than one visualization location. So when it comes to observability, understanding that there are different timescales for your data that are going to benefit from different visualization third-party tools. There are different users of that data. Some are going to be more focused in different parts of your stack and have different skill sets for managing that data and querying it, and yeah, taking ownership over collecting and storing that data and pushing it out to the third parties for the where they can help you is maybe something to think about as well.
Sorry, thank you so much, Abby, for that. I muted myself there. I'm going to open up a little poll for people because we've been talking a little bit about platform engineering and platform maturity, and I think what I'm trying to gauge here is, again, what degree of maturity sort of correlates to the observability discussion. Is it something that you folks in the audience are starting right at the beginning, or is that something that you're thinking about later on? So I'm just going to launch this poll while we continue the discussion so that it can run in the background. So the poll should be running now. So I'm just trying to work out a little bit about the platform maturity first, and then we'll go into an observability, open telemetry kind of a conversation after. I'm curious, Sonia, you're in the audience as well, of course, as my dear co-host for today. But you are also a subject matter expert here at Tyke around all things observability. So I'm very curious to know if you had to advise someone about things that people are forgetting at this point of time, what would that look like?
I think maybe we can ask the question to Andy, because during his introduction, sure, he said like there's many patterns that he keeps seeing, and I was like, maybe Andy needs to tell us a bit more about it, and maybe also to try to think from API point of view if there's any top one you can think about.
All right, over to you, Andy.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I like to start with an analogy because I think this sometimes makes it easier to understand, especially for people that are not that down in the weeds like we are every day. And Sonia, back to you, right? If you want to prepare a meal tonight and you have to buy 5 things from the grocery store, you probably write them on a list. You go to the grocery store, you buy exactly, let's say, the 5 eggs, whatever you need, right? And then you come back. It's a very simple way of getting the problem solved. The alternative would be that you send somebody for the first item, they come back with 100 eggs, and then you say, well, I only needed 5, so I take 5, 95 go back. And the same goes on for the remaining items. So basically what we're seeing here is we're solving one problem, we're getting what we need, but with 2 completely different approaches. And this is exactly what I see as the #1 pattern that at least I've observed in my 20-something years of analyzing distributed systems. It is what's called the N+1 query problem and requesting too much data and then filtering on the client side. So instead of going once to the liquor store, once to the supermarket, It's late. It's already late in the evening. It's time for liquor later on. But instead of going once to the supermarket and getting exactly the items that I need, you may go 5 times. And that's the same with from the front end to the back end via an API gateway, making too many round trips and then collecting too much data and then filtering on the client side. This is the #1 pattern that I've seen over and over again. And this is why I said at the beginning, I'm sometimes frustrated because I've been talking about this for so many years. And it feels like we're still seeing it, so I'm still doing something wrong, or at least it keeps me still in my job to talk about the N+1 query problem and fetching too much data and doing client-side filtering.
Got it. All right. Couple more questions in the chat that I'm seeing right now. There is a question from Miguel, which is about, I think which perhaps Sonia might have answered already, but it's about what is the intersection of API security and observability. And obviously, there is definitely a correlation there when you're thinking about where things would go wrong and trying to work out what that sort of all looks like and how do you get to the heart of the problem as quickly as possible. So I wonder, Navish, maybe do you have an opinion on that in terms of how does that intersection sort of look like between observability versus or together with API security?
The cool thing about observability is that we are monitoring a lot of things which are going on in the system, right? It depends upon what you want to focus in on. Do you want to focus in on optimization of your infrastructure resources? Or do you want to focus in on optimization of how you have built your applications? Or you want to focus in on how we have security embedded libraries within our application code so that they are hardened from a security perspective? So if you want to focus in on that aspect, observability would provide at least the foundation to get that data. And then if that's the area which you want to focus in on, a specific team, they would have access to that data. Not everybody starts in that domain because that's, generally speaking, not the core use case of observability. Security teams have other things which they want to focus in on. But as we are speaking, observability is expanding its domain. It's not just giving eyes on or insights on what is happening within our applications, environments, databases, infrastructure, but also hardening your systems as well. And this is becoming an important area for that.
Got it. Ruchir, anything to sort of add to that from a security observability standpoint, or maybe that expanding domain of observability as Navish mentioned?
I wasn't a security engineer, so I may not be the best individual, but like from a platform owner perspective, especially at Netflix, we saw a lot of intersection in terms of here's access logs that the engineer needs in order to troubleshoot their applications, but so does the security engineer who wants to ask questions around threat detection. And oftentimes, if it's the same data, but it's all actually sort of getting duplicated in 2 different platforms so that 2 different personas can ask different questions, it almost sort of comes with that burden of, now there is just boilerplate and why wasn't, like to your earlier question, if this was the first day, of the rest of our lives, would we do this differently? And I would say the answer is yes.
Got it. There is one final question that has come up, which is sort of, again, it's that definitions part of things where the difference between sort of observability versus analytics that comes up from time to time, because sometimes for whatever reason, it's sort of bucketed under the same thing. So I'm curious, maybe Andy or Abby, or maybe both of you, one after the other, do you have an opinion on this? Do you see them as sort of similarly under the same umbrella, or do you see them as completely separate things? We'll start maybe with Abby first.
I was say Andy was mid typing, okay. So I'll let him get his thoughts out.
All right, Andy first, and then we'll head over.
I hope it's okay to bring another analogy because I think this just resonates. Sure. So if you think about you're driving a car, and in my case, I'm in Linz, and if I want to go to Vienna, and I drive the car, I can observe the speed through the speedometer, right? That's one thing. But the question is from analytics, how fast am I going? Will I get a speed ticket because I'm too fast on the Autobahn? How about if I go too fast, will I have enough battery life if I'm an electric car, or have enough fuel? And also, how are my tires doing? Because maybe the Autobahn is not that great right now, and therefore, if I'm going too fast, my tires will burn. So I think the difference between observability and analytics is observability gives me different observations: speed, condition of the road, condition of the weather, my gas full, right, the tank, how full it is. And then I may get this from different sources. And then analytics is actually making sense of the data by connecting some of those in context. And I think this also then comes back to what others have already said here. You need to collect data, you need to connect it so that you can then ask questions that even maybe you didn't know you had in the beginning. And I think that's for me the difference between observability, observing one or multiple systems, and then analytics is connecting the dots and giving answers.
Fantastic. I think we are almost at time right now. Maybe final comment from you, Abby, I think just to close this off here, in terms of, if something that you needed to do today, so after this conversation, after this conference, someone is going back and building out their observability strategy, what would be sort of that one advice that you give? I think we've got a couple of really good advice that have come up so far, which is articulate the value, understand what your needs are, and then based off of that, go ahead and formulate that strategy. Is there anything specific that you would recommend that you've again seen and for people to take back from today?
I think that is the sentence I would have said. You stole it right out of my mouth there. But maybe to add on to what Andy was saying about being able to connect data, having a philosophy around how the data should be shaped and connected to each other so that people in disparate different parts of the organization can be empowered to collect data and engage that with the rest of the organization is important. It's going to be really hard to have a centralized engine where they're the only ones who can generate new information, new data, new ideas, but having a philosophy, having a way to validate your data collection against patterns that the organization has signed off as shared understanding, I think would be a really big part of that design phase of things.
Great. Thank you so much for that. There is a question around the impact of AI on observability, which I think we'll pick up in a future session, because we do have another panel that is going to be all about designing observable API platforms. So stay tuned for that. That is going to come right before lunchtime, so you don't want to miss that. And we'll be picking up specifics of observable API platforms. We'll talk a little bit about AI. We'll talk a little bit about security and what that design of that API platform looks like in practice. So definitely don't miss out on that. For today, for this session, this is all we have. I really want to give a huge round of applause for everyone here in the panel. This was an incredible incredible discussion to kick us off for today. Thank you once again very much, all the panelists over here. And thank you everyone who was in attendance. Thank you for your questions. We are just getting started. So we are going to head over to our next session. We are going to be starting off our parallel tracks. There are 2 sessions coming up. One, which is going to be about introducing open telemetry in your organization in 3 steps by Adriana. And there's going to be the other session in the implementers track, which is about improving your telemetry data which is going to be about adoption by development teams by Hope, which is going to be great. So with that, I will see you in 10 minutes time over to the next session. So thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.